Okay, so what we're going to do is obviously I'm not today. I will probably now wait for everyone to join. As they join, we'll accept them in. Keeping in mind this particular learning outcome has a couple of assessment criteria, and obviously we will need to spend a bit of time to cover all of these today. So I know some of you have not been able to join the previous sessions, but that's absolutely okay. Some of these sessions are now on YouTube, and you should be able to. So you should be able to essentially go onto the YouTube channel and be able to see the previous sessions which have been done. Just quickly sharing them with you so that you're aware. So as you can see, the YouTube, in this case, today's session is being broadcasted here. But when I go into live and essentially look at for Unit 6, this is Level 3 Health and Social Care, Unit 6, LO3, which is happening today. If I go back, this was Learning Outcome 2, and that was Learning Outcome 1. So today we are looking at covering Learning Outcome 3. And these previous sessions are available, and the presentations and other bits on Moodle. So let's make a quick start in terms of discussing. So thanks so much for joining, most of you. If you keep your minds muted when you're not asking questions, this will help us reduce a bit of background noise, basic housekeeping. And apart from that, feel free to ask questions through the chat route and stop me if you want to, and unmute your microphone to ask me questions when we're discussing. So let me just quickly switch you over to the unit specification. Today we are looking at covering Learning Outcome 3. This is the unit which is personal and professional development in health and social care sector. Slightly, as I mentioned earlier, a couple of weeks back when we started this unit, this is a bit of a combination of academic and research skills for those of you who took that unit, and a bit of new content. Although the credit value on this unit is 8, it's been reduced from 15, which is where the unit has been split into 2: research skills in healthcare, and personal and professional development, which is to do with looking at PPD, your CPD, and why training and development is important within this sector. Now, today's focus is on covering Learning Outcome 3, which talks about how reflective practice supports professional development. Now, we'll be looking at a few assessment criteria. So defining the term, what is reflective practice? We look at the 2 theoretical models which have been, over the years have come up, and they have now become pretty much a standard when we talk about reflection and, practice, which is done of things that we have done in the past. With the experience you learn, and then you change some of the bits that you need to do in order to do them better, so that it's more efficient, more productive, and more related to, say, for example, maintaining standards or quality of care and things like that. So reflective practice, there are 2 theoretical models that we will discuss: the Klobb's learning curve and the Honey and Mumford model, which is what we will be looking at essentially discussing in this particular criteria. The third one looks at analyzing the impacts of values, attitudes, and beliefs. So the person-centered approach, wherein we look at the 6 C standards, or 6 C's of care. Essentially, one of them being they are the ones that we'll be looking at focusing on when we talk about what is the impact of attitude, value, and belief on the health and social care provision, and when you're providing these services. The 4th assessment criteria talks about reflect on your own learning. So that is where you're going to be looking at taking in a particular example from what you do in your place of work, or what you have learned in this particular course, and then you'll do a bit of reflection on it. There is one merit and one distinction criteria, and this is basically an extension of how 3.2, which talks about how you reflect on professional development using the process of reflective practice. And then it talks about us analyzing the benefits of reflective practice. So this is where the learning outcome is going to be focused on with regards to the process of reflective practice today. That is the key topic of discussion in Learning Outcome 3, and how it supports training and development, and professional development in particular, within the health and social care sector when you're working as a staff, as a member, as an employee within a particular organization which delivers services to the members of public. And this is not in general. Reflective practice is something which is very key part of professions like medicine, teaching, health and social care, because here people learn from experience. They look at reflecting of what has happened in the past, and sometimes you make course corrections and changes, and then you go on implementing or doing the same things, as we sometimes say, with a bit of hindsight, I would have done this way. So it is all about literally looking at how do you reflect on your practice the first time you carried on the task or did a job, and then how you would do it differently now that you know this is the outcome which could happen, is what we are going to be looking at discussing in terms of reflective practice. Now, there is a fair bit of content in this particular learning outcome that we'll be looking at covering. And if I switch over to the presentation, the indicative content talks about definition of reflective practice. It talks about the models of reflective practice, the theoretical models that we need to discuss, and then how do we identify our own values, attitudes, and beliefs when we look at providing healthcare services. Or, for example, when I say healthcare services, what I mean is if I work as a nurse, if I work as a healthcare worker, if I work as a healthcare assistant, or I work as a healthcare professional in this sector, then how do my values, attitude, and belief help me in delivering the roles and responsibilities that I do when I basically look at working within a particular organization. And then towards the end, how do I look at reflection of my own learnings? That is what we will need to discuss, and that would be covered in the fourth assessment criteria of 3.4, reflect on your own learning. And the merit and distinctions are extensions of 3.1 and 3.2, because here is where we are looking at essentially 3.1, because we define reflective practice, and then we get into how does reflective practice support professional development, and what are the benefits of reflective practice, and that would help us meet the merit and the distinction criteria. Now, let's start off with the key terminology with regards to understanding this reflective practice. Now, when we say reflective practice in general, what does this mean? It means the ability that we have to be able to learn from our own actions, and this it then allows us to engage and do the task in a much more fairer way or much more better way, and that would be the process of what is called reflective practice. So just give me 1 second. Want to bring other people in who have joined or not. To primarily, understand how does, reflection into what you've done in the past helps you improve, in terms of doing some of these things in a much better way. And that is what would be termed as what is called reflective practice. So when we look at something that we have done, and with that particular ability to be able to look at how the results and outcome of that particular task, exercise, job has come out, what we do is we reflect on our own actions so that we can engage in the process by doing it in such a way that it allows me to do it the same activity in a much better way or a much effective way. And that would be in general the process of what is called reflective practice. Sometimes you also say reflective practice is learning through or from experience that you have gained from getting hold of new information. So sometimes we're able to do things differently and in a much better way, because what we have done is we've been able to get hold of information that was not available earlier, but with that information now applied to the situation, that allows us to do the same thing in a much better way. And that again is reflective practice. But in general, if somebody is to ask you a question and if you have to reply in a very simple way, or in the simplest form, that what is reflective practice? It is basically thinking about or reflecting on what you can do or what you have done, and how this would be useful in terms of completing a task or completing a task well. That would be a process that you would look at reflection for. Now, an example of this, which I would literally want to give you, is when we look at, we are all aware of athletes. We are all aware of people who train, work hard to become athletes. And obviously, if you're, say, for example, a runner, and if you're an athlete who's basically any sort of athlete, you're a person who's interested in swimming, cycling, running, gymnastics, whatever it is. Now, what you realize is that when you train to basically, prepare for a particular competition or a particular activity that you're going to be participating in, you do a lot of practice. And what that practice does is it makes you better. So if you're a marathon runner, now, if you're running regularly, continuously exercising, and with practice, what you're doing is you're actually reducing the time which is required to run the same distance. And that is helping you, reflect on how you're able to reduce this time. It could be because of, better toning and shaping of your body, like looking at taking, say, certain types of diet, looking at reducing your muscle, but at the same time increasing your capacity and your stamina. And by taking, coaching or professional support from people who are going to be able to help you, achieve that aim in terms of a certain amount of time that you want to run that particular marathon. And any such equipment that you would be looking at using, that would help you improve that time with the process of practice. And every time you run that particular distance and you shave off a few seconds, for example, if you're running a mile and you're, shaving off 10 seconds in the first run, second run, and after a bit of practice, again, a certain amount of time, then this is something which is possible because you're experiencing running. You are basically then reflecting on what is required to be changed in terms of how you start, what methodology you take in terms of running. And then you're planning with the help of some professionals to get guidance, advice, coaching, maybe nutrition, in this case, technique. And that is allowing you to reduce the amount of time that you are trying to look at in order to cover that distance. And that activity that you've done time and again, but you're reflecting on it, to improve your time every time you undertake that activity, is nothing but the process of what is called reflective practice. That means you're gaining experience, you're using that experience and the new information and the new insights that you've got from coaching, training, nutritionists and other people helping you. And that is helping you to improve your own target of running that mile in a lesser amount of time, or helping you achieve that target to run that mile in a particular time frame that you've set, is the process of reflective practice. Now, when you talk about this in general, there is going to be lots of questions that you ask. What did I learn? Or, what was easy? What went well? What was difficult? What went badly? What was difficult? And, things that I could do to change the problem that I faced, or how did I feel when I met that target? These are all questions that you are going to be looking at asking yourself when you do the process of reflection. And the process of reflection that you do to achieve something would be termed as a process of what is called reflective practice. Now, a bit more about this when you look at, what is the meaning of the term reflective practice? Now, if I say that you imagine that you've come home and you've had a really bad week, but everything that you did was, especially trying to get the work done, was going wrong. Now, when you try and look at analyzing those things and you confront them to say, why, I did this, but actually this is what the outcome was, or this is what happened, then what it allows you to essentially see or understand is that, okay, what were the things which were going wrong? For example, if I did something on Monday or did something on Tuesday, this is how this thing went. But again, I was following the process, but again, things were not coming out. The outcomes were not coming out as it was expected. Now, what you're looking at doing in this process is basically thinking about it over the weekend and looking into the reasons of why things went wrong. And that is nothing but looking at the process of reflection. You are actually looking at going back and, again, visualizing the actions that you took, in the process of completing that job and looking at reviewing those actions to see what action actually went okay and what action actually did not go okay or did not go as planned, and that is why the result did not come out. And then when you do is you repeat those things again, time and again, to see what were the gaps or what were the areas in which this led to this particular outcome. And this process that you're doing in order to relive and go through and understand that why it did not come out as planned in the course of the activity that you did across the week is nothing but reflective practice. So the act of thinking about how our experiences have been in order to learn from them would be learn from them for the use in future is basically going to be the process of reflective practice. And in real life, sometimes, we do not get these opportunities because we don't have a time machine that I can go back and correct some of those problems which occurred in the past by using a time machine. So here, what we do is you learn from your experiences, you learn from your mistakes, and what you do is you don't commit those same mistakes again. And what you do is you put things in place, which could be changes, which could be, things that you need to look at avoiding as mistakes. And that then allows you to do those things. When I say do those things, in the case of a nurse, for example, if I'm gone in for the bloods and I'm finding it difficult to find the vein of a patient on the hand to, put in a drip, is essentially because I haven't applied, say, chloroform, or I haven't, patted the wrist a couple of times to see if I can make the vein appear, or you've not tied a band around the hand, which basically constricts your skin and makes the vein appear. Now, these are things that you learn in training when you're training as a nurse. And this is the process of what is called reflective practice. That means you observe somebody doing it, then you follow the same process, and then you get the outcome which you're trying to get. When you go and a patient comes, you're able to draw blood for the purposes of blood samples or whatever, and you're able to do it the first time. So what is a process that you tap. Sometimes you hear this, you tap the, wrist, and what you do is you apply a bit of chloroform, you put a band around, a stretchy rubber band around to make sure that the veins are more constricted in the area and they kind of tend to protrude out. And that allows you to successfully do it because you're following the correct procedure to be able to, do that. And that would be a process of reflection because you've observed it, you've tried it yourself. If it did not work, you made some corrections to it in terms of the process, and then you've taught yourself from life experiences that you've had, and that would be the process of reflective practice. Now, if I go into the second assessment criteria, because it was only defining the term reflective practice, what we need to now do is understand what are reflective models which have been refined and discovered, and then they are now widely adopted when we talk about the process of reflective practice. So reflective practice is a word that we're going to use throughout this learning outcome, and we need to be very clear that it stands to be, or it is defined as the ability to reflect on one's action so as to engage in the process of continuous learning. Now, this is something what is an accepted definition of what I would say reflective practice is. The ability to reflect on one's action so as to engage in the process of continuous learning so that you're able to do things right the next time or do it in a way which is much more efficient is basically the process of reflective practice. Now, there are two models, particular people who have done this particular research over the years, and they have come up with models which are now fairly accepted globally. And when we talk about David Klobb's learning cycle, this is one of the models that we think of, and he, as a pioneer, basically suggested these learning styles in the 1984, wherein he developed his particular methodology, wherein he talks about the experiential theory or the curve through which people learn how to do work at two levels. We'll go into a bit of detail in a bit, but for now, just one part. And the second part that we talk about is Honey and Mumford, which is the second, team which has done basically, the work on, learning styles. And when we talk about Honey and Mumford, Alan Mumford and Peter Honey, they were the two, people who basically came up again with a particular concept of how work can be inspired and built upon. And they were influenced by the CLOBS learning cycle. And they created or proposed what are called the four, various quadrants, essentially. And they divided, that people learn in four distinct styles of learning. And these four distinct styles of learning, in their bit, they have termed it as activists, reflectors, pragmatists, and theorists. So we'll go into details and look at these theoretical models. So let's start with the CLOBS learning cycle. Now, the CLOBS learning cycle basically has four distinct learning styles. That is what David Klob actually proposed in the 1980s. And he talks about that, learning for every individual works as four stages. It starts off with concrete experience. You do a bit of reflection on that experience, make some changes. Then you look at sometimes conceptualization. That means you have to do new tasks or new type of activities. And in this case, you use your experience and your previous, knowledge that you've gained from conducting an activity. You look at constructing and making some assumptions, and then take on some sort of a new work or make some modifications to the existing way that you would have carried out that job, because you feel that this way would be better. And that part is called the abstract conceptualization. And then you go into active experimentation, which is where what he suggested that you look at looking at modifying the concepts. You look at essentially trying out or doing the things in a newer way or in a better way, which you feel would be much more successful in terms of outcome, because you understand the environment in which it is being done, and you also understand why it is being done. So he basically came up with these four learning styles, which are basically defined in the CLOBS learning cycle. And they tend to be these four areas of concrete experience. That means you have actual experience of doing something. Reflective observation, which means you are able to reflect on your experience and build on it to, carry things out or carry out jobs and responsibilities. Then you also look at abstract conceptualization, which is looking at learning from your own experience and putting things into practice. That means you have learned from either observing another person, or in some cases learn from your own experience, and you're able to use that to put it into different situations. And then the last phase being active experimentation, which is where you are able to modify some of the learning and experience that you've gained, and then test it out, and then carry out some of the tasks and functions which could result in newer experiences or newer kind of outcomes that you would want to uncover, or, for example, ensure that are being done from a point of view of, essentially carrying out that activity. Now, when we talk about, CLOBS learning cycle, there is a particular way that these things have to be carried out. You start with experience, you do a bit of reflection, you do a bit of conceptualization, you test it, and that cycle goes again and again in a loop. And this allows you to essentially learn from what you are, essentially doing in the aspects of, taking things forward. Now, these learning styles, which Klob actually came up with, also led him to develop what is called the four different types of learning styles that we now see when sometimes we are asked to fill in, what are called the learning style questionnaires. This is to understand what kind of learner you are. So WARC style of questionnaire, sometimes we look at, our bits and pieces that we get and lean into, the CLOBS learning cycle. So here, when he set out these four stages, a better implementation of that, tends to be when we talk about two different axes, the x-axis and the y-axis. So in the x-axis, he talked about perception, and in the y-axis, he talked about, x-axis processing, and in the y-axis, he talked about perception. So sometimes you look at doing things by watching, thinking, you do them actually, and then sometimes you're feeling about it, and then you watch somebody else do it, and then you actually go about, doing those things. So this also led to the development of what are called further learning styles, which is you would find people sometimes who are willing to do things, but they would be looking at observing it first when others do it. They feel that they can watch these things and then learn from it. Sometimes people look at assimilating knowledge, information, and then they think they need to be trained or given some training on it, and then they can carry out those roles and responsibilities, or in this case, those activities. Sometimes people just think about it, they make their own assumptions, and they feel a bit more independent. And what they can do is they can think and act, and they can go about doing those things. And last but not the least, sometimes people, what they do is they look at experiencing the activities themselves. For example, if I go bungee jumping, I would like to experience it first, and then see whether this is something that I want to do, or if I feel like doing it again, then I would undertake that activity again. So you are involved in a way of actively experimenting first to see if this is a sport that I would take up, or if it is an adventure sport that I want to take up. If not, then you are basically looking at taking it further. So these bits, when we talk about the CLOB's learning styles, are applicable across a number of fields. It could be applied in medicine, it could be applied in teaching, it could be applied in health and social care, and that is why they are quite relevant when we talk about how people go about learning. Now, further work that he's done, he's classified these 4 learning styles into certain quadrants, which is looking at active experimentation, looking at observation and watching, accommodating, diverging, converging, or assimilating. So there are 4 types of learners. If I look at the curve in terms of how they would learn, and if I plot them across the X and Y axis, what CLOB believed was that sometimes people cannot perform the jobs across 2 different variables, and they cannot think and they cannot feel, say for example, at the same time. If they are thinking, they will not be doing the job. But in some cases, if they are feeling it, they cannot be putting the thinking hat on, and that is where these 4 different types tend to differ. So when he constructed this particular matrix of 2 by 2, what we see here, the 4 parts, accommodating, diverging, assimilating, and converging, is where he defined that these kind of roles would influence this kind of style for a particular learner. So some people learn from doing things, some people learn from observing things, some people learn by experimentation, and some people look at just by observation, letting others do it, and then jump into to see if this is something that they would want to do or not. And they are then put into a matrix of 2 by 2, wherein these are the 4 types of learners or learning styles he came up with. And that is what is described, in the CLOB's learning cycle. Now, I have created 1 or 2 slides to discuss some of these roles in detail, but towards the end, when we discuss Honey and Mumford style, what I'm going to ask you to do is, as an activity, do a bit of a homework to take up this by doing the multiple choice questionnaire to find out what kind of learning style you have in particular when we look at CLOB's cycle and Honey and Mumford's learning style. So I put some more details in, and when we talk about the 2 theoretical models that you need to look at from a point of view of understanding reflective practice, CLOB's learning curve, or CLOB's experiential learning cycle, as we call it, is one of the models that we need to look at. And you need to be aware of these 4 different types of roles or learning styles which come out of it, which is concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. And when we talk about learning styles, we talk about these 4 in particular, and these 4 in particular that we talk about tend to be diverging style, assimilating style, converging style, and accommodating style. And that is what I've covered in these slides. So these are bits that you need to just go through. But more importantly, we will do a questionnaire to understand what kind of learning style. I will ask you to fill a multiple choice questionnaire to try and understand what kind of learning style you have. Now, let's look at the Honey and Mumford. Now, Honey and Mumford learning style, they were influenced by CLOB's work, and they came up with what are called, 4 different styles according to them, and they tend to be, 4 ones which include They are defined as activist, theorist, pragmatist, and reflector. Now, when we talk about, why they came up with this, and how they wanted to investigate this further, they were looking at understanding primarily the fact that how do people learn, and how do people learn effectively. And the idea is they wanted to come up with something which basically allows them to categorize people into 4 different categories, and these 4 different categories then allow us to understand what characteristics people show, which we can use to identify them and put them into that particular category. So they said that people learn, but there are 4 different types which basically can be classified. And if we know the type that they are, then it allows organizations, businesses, and managers to put them into training or put them into development from the aspect of what particular style suits them best for the purposes of learning. Because let's not forget, in the health and social care sector, just like teaching, medicine, some of the other sectors, we have to look at the process of learning as a continuous process of learning. That means you keep learning new skills, you keep learning new techniques to be able to deliver and maintain the care standards which are required when you're giving services to the members of public. So these 4 styles are heavily influenced by the Klopp's learning cycle, but they tend to be slightly different in terms, because what they did was they went ahead, both of them, they went ahead and defined the characteristics what each particular type shows. And that allows us to recognize that this person is an activist, which means that this person learns best by doing things practically. And if I know that this is how they learn, then I can put activities, trainings, or developmental tasks in and around that particular person for him or her to learn, but using and asking them to do things themselves. And that would be the best way that they will be looking at the process of learning and development. So they basically developed this across the horizontal and vertical axis, and again use the same concepts of perception versus processing, but came up with these 4 categories, which are then defined individually to understand why is a person an activist, why is a person a pragmatist, why is a person a theorist, and why is a person which is a reflectionist. So here, these 4 slides basically list out details of how do we identify an activist. So if we are looking at people who can learn best by doing things, they want to get their hands dirty, they want to get into the thick of things, then in those cases, you are looking at people who would like to be thrown into the deep. They want to work with others, they want to try out new experiences, they want to seek out adventure, and they basically learn by doing things themselves. They would be termed as what are called activists. Now, activists in organizations tend to be people who are involved in brainstorming, group discussions, role plays. They are good at solving problems, and they are the people who would be termed as activists. When we talk about theorists, these are people who like to do things their own way. They will think about it, they will look at conceptualizing it, they will go into the theory, the background, why it is required to be done, how it is required to be done, what is the outcome of that particular process or activity going to be, and they will assimilate, analyze, get all the information, and at some stage then put a process in place to carry out that activity. So these people tend to be termed as theorists. They are generally going to ask a lot of questions. They are people who basically look at a logic behind before doing anything. And they will not be looking at jumping to conclusions. They are people who are going to, look at everything in a minute detail, with minute details, and then they will like to make any conclusion. So they are people who basically are, an organization who come up with knowledge. They look at facts and figures. They look at, applying theory. They look at a bit of storytelling. And they are people who would be generally termed as what are called theorists. Now, when I talk about pragmatists, we are looking at people who can learn by putting things into practice in a real world. So that means here, what we are essentially looking at is people who would want to look at a new idea, that they've learned and put it into practice immediately. They are the ones which want to seek out new ways in which things can be done by putting them into action. So if you've learned a new process, or if I've learned a new trick, they would want to try it out immediately to see what could be the outcome. And they tend to be people who basically are good at doing things in a way which are, in order to get things done. Let's put it this way. They are the set of people who are going to be obviously doing things, but they'll also be open to taking feedback. And the idea of taking feedback is to become an expert in terms of how that task or that activity can be performed in the best possible way to achieve the result. They seem to be people who are very good at solving problems. They seem to be able to translate theory and put that into practice. And they are people generally who are tasked with carrying out, jobs and responsibilities in your organization, because they can reflect on their experience. They can straight away, when I say straight away, what I mean by that is they can actually reflect on their experience, gain and observe from others, and then look at putting things into, making things work. They can put things into practice and make things work or complete tasks. The last category, according to Honey and Mumford, was reflector. Now, these are people who learn best when they observe others. They are also sometimes called fence sitters. They will see others do the task first, and then they will jump into it whether they want to do it or not. So they do not want to start or take the first initiative. Sometimes the term fence sitters tend to, also be looking, also tends to reflect on what is called, reflectors, is because this allows them to observe how things are happening, what is going right, what is going wrong, what things have to be corrected, and then they look at carrying out their actions. So these people generally, do not rush to or take up aggressive deadlines. For example, if I say a manager would give out a job and say, okay, we need to finish this up today, they would take their own time and look at a rationale that, okay, how it will be done, how much long will it take to complete one task. They'll observe others and then come to some sort of a commitment or commit to a timeline. Now, these kind of people, essentially reflectors, when they learn, they learn when they are put in a group. They've been asked to perform activities or do activities which are done as groups, and they require, I'll put it this way, they learn when they are being coached. And this is where the characteristics of reflectors are. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages of, these learning styles. And, sometimes when we look at the advantages and we look at the disadvantages, there are a few that we need to talk about. Some of these learning styles, can suit people who are looking at, essentially basic skills at the foundation level. Some of them, the disadvantages, and this tends to be good when you're getting into something that you want to learn. For example, if you're training as a nurse, you're training as a healthcare professional, you're becoming a doctor, you want to be able to learn skills, you want to be able to make yourself aware that these are the basic skills that I need to be able to take up this role. And in that stage, you're looking at learning, you're looking at continuous learning. And that is where these styles are useful, because we can, identify the type of person you are and how you learn and how best you learn in a particular situation, and then put activities in and around you, around that style, which allow you to pick those traits up, qualities up, and, essentially help you develop. The disadvantages tend to be that when we look at people who want to learn, sometimes you would see that these people do not, or they are not able to learn, is because, some of these, styles might not be able to categorize everyone into these four categories. So if I do not meet the characteristics or the attributes of reflector, pragmatist, say, for example, theorist or activist, then what do I do? Then what style do you think is best for me in terms of learning? Now, in such cases, if I don't look at an example, if I give you an example and I say, if I say that the people who can, reflectors are people who can learn by observing others. They do not want to jump and, start straight away. They want to be looking at first understanding how things have to be done, and then they start getting into it. Now, an example would be, if I say that I want to become a carpenter, and if I look at observing a few people who are doing carving or working as a carpenter, and then I think that I'll be able to replicate that as an action straight away, might not happen, because you have to get into the thick of things. You have to train, you have to be able to use the equipment to become a carpenter. Similarly, if you want to become a doctor or you want to become a nurse, you can't just observe somebody doing things and then basically say, okay, I can do the same things and I can, become a nurse or I can become a healthcare worker. No, you would need training. And in those cases, training could be different forms of training that you need for a certain duration. You might need academic qualification to give you or put some icing on the cake in terms of understanding the theory and then putting into practice. And that would then allow you to become a successful nurse or a healthcare assistant or a doctor. So sometimes not all styles would fit. One style would not fit all. And in this case, the models have a bit of a disadvantage that if we look at these four and we look at these four experiential learning styles, then sometimes these models do not conclusively allow us to come to a result or a conclusion to say that this is how this learner would categorize in terms of learning. So these could be some of the disadvantages. Now, what I want to look at is basically look at doing an activity. And the reason I want to say that we want to look at doing this activity is because I want to look at understanding what kind of style you have in terms of being able to learn. And if you were put in a particular situation, then what would be the best style that would be suited for you to learn in that situation using Klobb's learning cycle and Honey and Mumford's 4 different learning styles. Now, this is a link that I put on the presentation, which is a multiple choice questionnaire that you will need to take, which is this bit here. And there are some questions which will come up which you have to answer. There is no right and wrong answer for any question. And what I would suggest is that at the end of it, what you have to do is read the question and answer. There are 80 questions which you will get. And these, at the end of it, when you take these questions and you give the answers, what it will do is give you a result. And that result is what I would say that you need to be able to screenshot and keep an email so that we know what kind of learning style you have when you undertake this questionnaire. So this questionnaire you can take any time, as many number of times. I think this is something which is comprising of 40 questions. The Klobb's learning curve has 80 questions. Honey and Mumford about 40 questions. There could be adaptations of this same quiz done in various organizations, but the question types remain the same. So all you have to do is, there's no right and wrong answer for it. Read the question and answer it. Now, once you do that, at some stage towards the end of your 40 questions that you've answered, this is going to give you what is called a result. And that result is primarily going to be telling you what kind of learning style you have. And if you take a screenshot of that, would be helpful, because what we want to be able to do is understand what is your ideal learning style when we look at these theoretical models of reflective practice, and want to figure out in terms of what would be the ideal style for you to look at when we look at the process of the categorization into 4 different types. So I'm just going to try and see if I can find a screenshot of what I took and in terms of when I finished this particular questionnaire. So it was good for me to also find out and see what kind of learning style I have, and that would have been great. So maybe make sure that you keep a screen print of it, and that would allow us to basically discuss this a bit later. So I think I came out as a pragmatist, and that was something good. So most of you, I would encourage you to take this particular questionnaire as a bit of a homework, and then look at what kind of reflective, what kind of learning style you come up with when you undertake this particular quiz. Now, let's go. Any questions at this stage so far? Any questions that you want to look at this stage? Any questions, anybody? If you want to ask, you can ask through the chat room as well. But any questions at this stage, feel free to ask me. Okay. Now, looking at the assessment criteria 3.3, what we want to understand is how do we analyze the impact of our own attitude, values, and belief on the provision and practice of care. So when we look at the provision practice of care, there are these three values that we look at, which is attitudes, values, and beliefs, which are going to be important for us to be able to deliver care to a particular standard to any person or any member of public, which is looking at getting the care that is either through an operation, through a procedure, through a doctor, or a GP, or a nurse, or if they have had any condition or any sort of disease that they are recovering from. Now, when we look at the attitude, belief, and values, we basically look at relating them to how carers, for example, if you were to work as a health and social care worker, how carers, how these three bits, which is three bits that we are talking, attitude, values, and belief, would actually shape up your behavior, which you show, or the attitude that you bring towards the place of your work, and the behavior that you exhibit when you are essentially providing these services within a particular setup. What kind of expectations, what kind of, let's say, when I say expectations, what kind of requirements and expectations you are able to meet because of your own attitude, values, and belief that you bring to the place of work. Now, if I look at from a point of view of understanding the values, attitude, and belief, that could be of 3-4 different types. Now, I could bring something across, to the institution wherein I am coming from a particular, let's say, I have a particular belief, or I'm influenced by, say, for example, my own experiences in life, and they tend to kind of inform how I would primarily go about promoting or providing these services at the place of work. So when I look at my beliefs, what I think of is that things that I strongly feel about, they will guide me in my daily life and could be closely related to my morals and values. And as an example, if I'm a Christian, or I'm a Catholic, or I'm a Protestant, then they might influence some part of my attitude and behavior which I bring to work. Now, my beliefs might not necessarily be biased or based on facts. They could be also opinions. And my beliefs sometimes might not be formal ones. That means, if I have something and I believe something about the religion, and I act in a certain way, or if I look at certain things in a right and a wrong way, they could be based on my opinion and rather than being facts. So these are beliefs that I bring to the place of work, and they could affect how I provide, care or services within, the health and social care sector. Now, when I look at attitudes, they are basically approaches that we need to understand. So approaches means we're looking at how do we address or come to work, or, offer, our services at our place of work. They could be opinions, they could be mindsets that I have, and they have been developed over the years during my upbringing, and also because I've had some life-changing experiences or experiences in my own working that I've encompassed or I've faced, and they have influenced my attitude. Sometimes you say, he has a very rash attitude, or sometimes you say, he has a very carefree attitude. Now, the reason why you say this is because it is related to your morals, your values, the way you've been brought up, and the way you perceive things, and that helps shape your attitude when you do certain things. Now, when I talk about personal values, we are looking at principles and standards that we base our lives. So you could be influenced by your beliefs, your background, your education, your wider social networks, and they would inform your personal values. Now, personal values could also shape your personal ideas, which come from either myths, assumptions, some sort of prejudice or a discrimination, or something of an experience that you've had in the past, and they could influence your personal values strongly, because of the fact that you've gone through a particular trauma, or you've faced a particular trauma, or had an experience which has not been very pleasant, and that shapes up how you would get influenced by situations when you work, when you face them, or when you work with them. Now, we are not born with our values. We do not, we generally acquire them over a point in time throughout our lives, and this is something which can be changed. So beliefs and values can be changed depending on education, training, and the wider social networks, or the social circles that you have. Now, when we look at values, beliefs, and we need to bring them to our place of work, and attitude, and we bring them to our place of work to be able to professionally practice and offer services, that is where it will inform what will actually relate to in terms of what attitude, beliefs, values we have when we look at providing professional services or care services at our place of work. So in general, there could be, personal attributes that have developed over a point in time, and they have influenced your identity and also how you see them. And this would then basically at some stage manifest in terms of what kind of attitude you bring to work, what kind of behavior you show at your place of work, and what are the things that you believe are facts and opinions that could influence how you're providing these services. And that is why it is very closely related to how you would practice and provide, this at, when I say this, I mean care at your place of work. Now, if I were to ask you a question, think about a health and social care setting, say, for example, two settings, one a residential setting and a second a daycare center, which works and provides services to individuals. A residential setting is individual, somebody who's living, in an old age home, and somebody who's working with people who have learning disabilities in a daycare center. Now, what ways would you normally, look at attending these individuals? So if I put this full screen, because I want you to put your thinking hats on and then think about this question, that there are two different settings in healthcare, one a residential home where you're taking care of old age individuals, and the other being a daycare center wherein you are dealing with people who have learning disabilities. Now, how would you go about attending to them, and why do you think they are different from each other? So you can unmute your microphones. I think for this particular task, we're going to be looking at a few questions and a few answers, just to put your thinking hats on, to say, let's look at visualizing and then answer these. There's no right and wrong answer, but let's look at participating in a bit of a discussion to see, what you can come up with. So anyone in this case looking at understanding, okay, if you were working in a residential home, taking care of elderly individuals, what kind of setting would that be? And what kind of things in general that you can think of that you would need to carry out to provide services? And if some of you were working in a daycare center and working and helping individuals who have learning disabilities, what kind of a setup would that be? And how would you be looking at providing these services? So if I look at, say, for example, let's say a residential setting. Can you think of a residential setting? Residential setting being, we are looking at primarily a care home. And in that care home, we basically would talk about, say, for example, you're taking care of elderly people. And that setting would be a setting wherein, we are talking about, looking at basically talking about people who would require help to carry out their day-to-day activities. So in this case, we could be looking at their needs, their abilities, and some of them, if we look at cultural preferences, if they are from a different religion background, culture, then you might need to look at their values and beliefs to ensure that some of the services that you provide, for example, while they're dressing up, maybe do the curtain, or maybe if they need a bit of privacy, essentially because they, come from a different background or culture in terms of how things are done, you might need to adapt to those settings. And that is what you would look at, in terms of meeting those requirements. And you are again putting emphasis on your attitude, your values, your beliefs, in order to basically be able to provide these services in this particular, setup. So that could be a possible answer that I could think of when I'm dealing with people either in a daycare center or with disabilities, and obviously individuals living in a care home. Now, the other bit which I want to look at would be, second question is, why is it important that workers' own attitude and behavior has to be positive towards having positive beliefs, positive values, and their own life experiences? Why do you think this is important? Anybody, if you can think. So if you've had a particular experience in the past and you think that this is going to influence what you feel and how you deliver a particular service, would it have any effect, or would it be related to your beliefs, values, and your previous experience, and would it let's say influence how you provide this service to an individual? So what I would look at in this case is, I'd be looking at probably drawing out positives from the experience that I've had, and then look at an open communication channel to be able to deal with individuals, and obviously then provide some of these services. So that could be one of the things that you could do to look at encouraging individuals to communicate, and obviously look at the positives that you can draw out from your own experiences. Now, when we talk about personal attitude and behavior, what we are looking at is you're working to basically ensure that these services are being provided. Sometimes you work with a diverse range of individuals. And when I say diverse range of individuals, it could mean that people that you work with in teams are coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different beliefs. And obviously, they have the same set of knowledge and understanding because they've done the same academic qualification. For example, when you're a nurse or you're a healthcare professional, you've done the same type of course and have got the same academic qualification, and that is where you are working in a particular setup. But because every individual is different, what will happen is that you will at some stage be different from other individuals in terms of showing what values you have, what beliefs you have, and those values and beliefs essentially shape your behavior that you bring across to the organization. So let's look at another question which I want to look at when I talk about values, beliefs, and behavior. So think about the influences on your development that you've had in the past or in the present, and who and what do you think they have been and what are they now? So looking at the process of reflective practice, assuming you've had a lot of experiences from your past and present, what do you think would be, how do you think they would shape your attitude, behavior, and belief when you go to your place of work now? So what could be influences that you've had in your development? Who could influence your development? So your family, your friends, somebody that you work with in the place of work in your office, and they would be the ones which will have an influence on your development, right? Now, when I know that these people could have emphasis, or they could have some sort of a play in the development that I have in the role, then what you need to be able to do is basically have, in order to get different experiences, different, let's say, ideas and views, you need to be able to make, let's put it this way, you need to be able to work with different sets of people to be able to gain those experiences and that knowledge. And that would basically be, looking at the influence that you can have, or when you work within teams in a particular place of work. Now, one of the other questions could be, how would you describe yourself in terms of your own values and beliefs and your preferences? So here, it is about reflection, looking at what is the term, what does the term value mean to you, what does the term belief mean to you, and what are your preferences? And they would need to be, noted down, because if I look at myself, the way I've grown up and have been brought up, my family, my values, my belief, I would have my beliefs, my morals, my values being shaped up by what I have been taught and brought up as, and they would then influence, the attitude and behavior that I bring to my place of work, because some part of your learning has happened at home with your parents, with your family, with the near dear ones, and they tend to influence what attitude, values, and beliefs you bring to your place of work. Now, how would you like to see this in others? A simple question. If I want to ask you a direct question to say, how would you like to see these values, beliefs, and behavior manifest from others? How do you see them, from others? So, in the case of health and social care, we are looking at that. All these values, beliefs, behaviors, and attitude need to reflect one thing. They need to be reflecting into a caring attitude, an approach to essentially helping people, and the values and beliefs that you have, that you've grown up with, that you've learned through academic qualification or training, they need to reinforce how we need to provide care to the patients. So they are going to help us deliver better care, maintain the quality of care which is being provided, and to a certain extent ensure that we are singing all in, when you're working in the particular place, you're all singing from the same songbook, as we say, so you're all practicing the same policies, procedures to ensure that, people are getting the right amount of care and the quality of care which they need to get better, or, to get back soon to get back to their feet as soon as possible. Now, there are a few other questions that I would want to check. And one last one that I would put here is that what are customs? What are traditions? And, what are customs and traditions, and how do they influence your values and beliefs? So if I look at customs and traditions, how do they influence your values and belief? So customs could be traditions or expectations that your family has, or you've been over the years handed down, and you understand that, okay, the custom is, for example, the way you get married. You might have a ceremony in the church, you might have a ceremony in the temple, you might have a number of members from your family coming together on the joyous occasion, and that could be one of the traditions that you have in the family, the way you go about seeking, say, for example, union or marriage. Now, there could be certain amount of expectations. If I look at giving you an example, and we look at this as a example to say there could be certain amount of expectations when you're getting married, and that could be on the parent side, it could be on the daughter side, the son's side, the bride and the groom side, and they would be influencing or shaping up your experiences in terms of whether this needs to be done, that needs to be done, and things like that. Similarly, when you look at providing care, your customs and values and traditions that you've had over the years and you've believed in can also influence your place of work and the way you provide care. So in this case, when we talk about things which are related to religious, social, and customs, cultural customs and traditions, here is where you would need to look at ensuring that you provide dignity and respect, you respect the individual privacy, you provide all the information and allow the patient or the person to make independent decisions, whether they would want to do this or whether they would not want to do this. And this is going to be informed by our customs and traditions and the tolerance to these customs and traditions which you've observed over the years when you've grown up as an individual. So when we look at summarizing this particular task, and we talk about personal attitude and behavior, we are looking at our personal attitude and behavior being shaped in a way wherein we deal with people who have disability in the same way as people that we are dealing with who are absolutely able to do the tasks and functions themselves. And we do not differentiate, because of the disability or any sort of disadvantage an individual will have while providing care. And they also tend to be the fact that when we look at, our personal beliefs, values, attitude, they then tend to shape some of the, let's put it this way, the kind of attitude and delivery that we do at the place of work when we are providing care to the individuals. So what I've done in the subsequent slide is I've listed down what are beliefs, what are attitude, what are personal values, how they influence your professional values, organizational values, and where there could be a conflict because the way that you brought up, the way that you've learned, the customs, the traditions, and the cultural values that you had because of your upbringing, and how they can create a conflict when you are at a place of work and you're delivering care, and some of these can inform some of your actions, or shape some of your actions, and that is what we need to avoid. And that is the crux of this particular task that we look at from a point of view of understanding beliefs, attitudes, and values, and how they look at they being shaped up. Now, let's look at the last assessment criteria on this, which talks about what is self-reflection. Now, self-reflection is looking at a mirror, in a way, literally, and describing what you see. It's about assessing yourself and the way you work and how you study and how you do things in life. So basically, self-reflection means you're thinking about something the way, and you're looking at that from an introspection of how you would go about doing those things slightly differently, or how would these things help you in the future? And that would be the process of what is called self-reflection. Now, why is self-reflection quite important? It is important because it helps you review your skills and the things that you do at your place of work, and why would you carry on doing these things at a place of work in a particular way, or in a particular style, or with a particular attitude and behavior, and what needs to be corrected to ensure that you are delivering them in the right manner which is required by your employer. So in the case of health and social care, we are looking at meeting the standards of care, making sure integrated care is delivered, making sure the risk to life is mitigated. We are looking at taking precautions to ensure that let's say lapses in delivery of services do not happen, which can be fatal in some cases. So these are the bits why reflection is important when we talk about the health and social care sector. So we are looking at our strengths, our weaknesses, our skills. We're looking at the problems. We're looking at what has been achieved, success in a particular task, and then how this has brought across happiness. And then in some cases, looking at, if this has not resulted in the way things should have been, then what could be the possible solutions or alternatives that we need to look at? And they are all a process of what is called reflection. So self-reflection is something quite important. You would need to do this, at your end, in the case wherein you basically go in and look at, doing your SWOT analysis, and then with the SWOT analysis, look at, pinning down your attitude, beliefs, and values, and then see how they help you in doing things correctly. And the things when carried out, or tasks when carried out correctly, then lead to happiness. And obviously, in some cases, if it doesn't lead to the desired outcome, then what are the measures that have to be put in place in order to go about correcting them and ensuring that these can happen in the way and the goals and objectives are achieved, and in the way that the organization wants care to be provided. Now, the merit criteria essentially looks at the process of reflective practice. So here, what you would need to do is look at developing a CPD plan. And that CPD plan could be related to how you are developing your skills in this particular sector, whether it's employer-led, whether it's self-managed learning SML, or it is training and development, which is being done continuously over a period of time in order to improve the services that you deliver, in order to improve the standards of services that you deliver, and they will need to be reflective practice. And you have to basically use a CPD template here to be able to draw it out for yourself in order to meet the merit criteria. And basically what we need to be able to do is, once we've done this, we need to relate it to the fact of how it is helping you carry out your own work, in terms of your own responsibility, and carry out your day-to-day tasks within the health and social care sector. The distinction task is going to be focused on looking at understanding the benefits of reflective practice. Now, there are some benefits of reflective practice which have been, discussed, and they've been, clearly analyzed and clearly put forward now. So Professor Brendan Cropley from the University of South Wales was instrumental in designing what is called the reflective practice infinity loop. And this infinity loop basically, or the practice, the infinity loop lists out essentially the 5 benefits of reflective practice. It looks at improving self-awareness, facilitates development of knowledge in action. It talks about building creativity and practice, effectiveness. It talks about creating a mechanism which allows you to cope with demand and the changing demands which come up within the health and social care sector when you're delivering services or care essentially to patient. And last but not the least, it talks about facilitating the development of personal characteristics. That means your own skills and your knowledge in order to be able to work more effectively at your place of work. Now, there is a PDF which I put in, on Moodle, which is going to be talking about, the benefits of being a reflective practitioner. And this particular PDF is basically the PDF which Professor Cropley has designed, and that is the reflective infinity loop, which is available, that you need to go in and read. So any questions at this stage? So this has allowed us to cover the topic today of our discussion, which is looking at how reflective practice essentially supports our personal and professional development. There are some additional reading articles which are also going to be available on Moodle, and they would be primarily on reflective practice. And I would suggest that you need to read these articles so that you get a bit more understanding in terms of how reflective practice is used as a technique within health and social care to ensure that quality of care is maintained, the standards are met, and also ensuring integrated care is provided to patients. Now, one other thing which I would request and suggest is that let's not forget there is a bit of homework that I've asked you to do, is to look at discovering your own learning style by taking this particular questionnaire. And that link is something I would suggest that you need to take. It's a multiple choice questionnaire, no right and wrong answer. And you take a screenshot of it and make sure you email it to us so that when we start the discussion of the last learning outcome next week, which is tomorrow essentially, the idea would be to try and go through some of this to understand what is your learning style that has come up when you've undertaken this particular questionnaire. So that brings us to the end of today's session. And what I would like to do is invite, if there are any questions, if there are any doubts that you have after today's session, so let me know. And what we can do is obviously look at discussing them now. Okay, that's brilliant. So if we have no questions at this stage, what I would do is would be looking at ending the session. Some part of this is more to do with your own reading that you will need to do. And that would be primarily because of the fact that you have to look at the process of reflection, process of self-practice, and then go about, obviously getting into and reading some of the articles that I've uploaded on Moodle, which will discuss and give you more details about how reflective practice helps in the development of personal and professional skills, specifically related within the health and social care sector. So thanks so much for attending, and I'll catch up with you.